Hello, my name is Michael Rowe. I'm joined by a very special guest today, Ms. Charlene Murphy McCoy, and we're going to be talking about policy, also known as numbers. For those of you who don't know, policy is a form of lottery that was originated in the black communities across America. It was really big in Chicago, New York, and pretty much any place where they had a black community, north or south, you had the operation of policy. Now, of course, it's the state lottery and it's legal now, but in the early part of the century, it was illegal. And then it was, like I said, it was an all black African American owned operation. Then the Italian mafia moved in. Then the even bigger crooks took it from them, which is the state. So across the country, you have state lottery. Today, just giving some history of policy in Chicago from someone who lived in the era. Why this is so special for me, like a lot of African American history, it wasn't well documented. It started in 1885 when Policy Sam Young came up here from New Orleans. He was hustling policy out of his hat and just grew to a multi-million-dollar operation, but very little is known about it. So one of my crusades for the past almost 20 years has been documenting as much of the history of policy from those who were there. So without further ado, Ms. Murphy, kind of tell me about your experience with policy.
Okay, my experience with policy was really not experience per se hands-on.
Okay.
It was basically more of, as a child, hearing family members, friends, and what have you talk about it. It was, as you said, a very, very, they were just really hooked on it. And, it was nothing to something like, girl, I dreamed about fish last night. And they had what they called a dream book. They go into the dream book, they would look at the number that was by fish, and that was the number that they would play. It was a quarter mostly that they would play, and they might win $1. Some people might win $25, depending on, basically how much they, would bet for. But the one thing I did realize in hearing my parents talk is that nobody ever really won big. They spend a lot of money, sometimes their last money, because this is an era like I'm talking like the late 40s, early 50s, and you didn't have rich people. You had people that had a lot of kids, because back then everybody had 8, 9, 10 kids trying to feed, but they would always find somewhere within that budget to spend that quarter so that they could play that lottery for whatever.
How was that game actually played?
The game was played wherever there was a policy booth set up. It could be in someone's living room, or it could be on a corner, it could be in a drugstore or what have you, but it was a little box set up where people would go and play their number, and they were given a sheet of paper about as long as my hand, about so wide, with their numbers on them, and the numbers, the paper was white and the ink was green.
Okay. And like, for example, now from what you remember, how did people view it? Did they view it as vice? Did they view it as something bad? I know the government, of course, wanted to crack down on it, more, I believe, because of the African American operation. But yet today we had a lottery and no one's complaining about that. So how was it viewed in the community?
In the community, it was something that they really set their minds to. People would spend their last, and as I said earlier, no matter how much their income was or how low their income was, they always managed to get that, because it was mostly only a quarter that they would play. And from that quarter, you could win $1 depending on how you played the number, or as much as $25.
Okay. So you can play the number a different way. Is it similar to like now, when you can like box a number, play it straight, or was it something similar to that?
I don't think so. No, I think you just, whatever the number was, you just played it. You couldn't box it or play, whatever the case may be. That was not as, it wasn't as sophisticated as that then. It was just straight playing the number.
Okay. Now, do you remember any of like the big honchos of the game? Do you recall any names? Like the Jones boys, Ted Rowe, or any of those names?
As I said before, I was a child at the time, and mostly what knowledge I have is what I overheard from grown people speaking mostly, and that was back in the back, because I come from an era where children were seen and not heard, so you had to speak and listen.
Okay, all right. So what are some of the stories that you do remember hearing?
One horror story, for instance, that happened in my family. My mother was always afraid of the dark, and she always kept lights on, and she always kept, music playing, especially if she was by herself. And it was eventually, the story was told to me that they had what they call collectors in the neighborhood that would collect the policy money, and then whoever the bigger person was, as you said earlier, it was a black person, and eventually became the mob, and they'd come in to collect the money. Well, this guy, unfortunately, didn't have all of the money. I don't know if he spent it all or part of it or what have you, but they had come in, and everybody in the neighborhood knew that they were coming in to collect this money from him. And my mother, there was like an apartment building. This is at 22nd and Federal, which is now projects. At that time, it was homes and apartment buildings. It's now the projects down there now. But as I said before, it was homes. And we were in the home, and there was a home on one side of the street, and the other side of the street was an apartment building, 3-story. And my mother happened to be looking out the window, and they had taken the guy. It was 3 guys, she said, taking him up to the 3rd floor. And he didn't have the money, and they threw him off of the 3rd floor onto the ground in a gangway type of situation, because your windows. And she saw this, and she was so afraid that they had saw her see them do this, that she lived in fear, from what other family members told me, for a long time, thinking that they were going to come back and get her too as a result of this. And because of that, she started drinking. That was one of the reasons why she started drinking. And she eventually ended up, unfortunately, becoming an alcoholic as a result of that.
Wow, that one incident, it just traumatized her?
It traumatized her.
Wow.
It traumatized her. Well, just think about it. She saw them kill them.
Yeah, I would.
And she knew they were to be played with. They were actually the mob that had come in to collect their money, and he had spent it.
Okay. So, now... So now, as the community, you say, you may be too young to remember, like when you're talking about, as it left from the hands of the blacks into the outside white mob, like what was the community's thoughts about that, or how do you feel about something like that? Like, what are your thoughts on that? Well,
as a child, I didn't have much of a thought, but you could hear grown-ups talking in regards to it, and they didn't. If I can remember correctly, they didn't really, show much of a feeling about it, other than the fact that these people had it and now these people had it. They were more concerned with playing their number, and winning.
All right, so
that's what they're mostly concerned with.
Management wasn't a big issue.
No, it didn't become, not in the where I was, as far as family or whatever is concerned. Now maybe someone that was higher up might be able to tell you more, but from where I was, I didn't hear anything as a child that, I knew, I heard that who had taken it over, because these guys that killed the guy I'm telling you about, they weren't the ones originally that was collecting the money. These were some, because I remember my mother, they saying that family members and my mother saying that there were some new sheriffs in town, and there may have been some of the collectors that spent a little money and they just got a slap on the wrist. This guy got tossed off of a roof, almost of a 3rd story, so that much I do remember them saying that the collectors were not as quick to spend the money as a result of their changing hands. It got a little more stricter, and rules were enforced.
Wow, that's interesting. And how often would you see those policy slips? Like maybe it's like
all over the street. My sister and I was talking about that. You could always tell when there was a drawing. Now, I don't remember exactly how often or when the drawings were done. It may have been done every day or whatever the case may be. But it was in the morning. People were drawing in toward the afternoon or the early evening is when it was drawn. And you could always tell about how many people, because then you see them laying all over the street. And that is a strong memory of mine as a child, as seeing these short pieces of paper laying all over the sidewalks and the street as a result of people that had lost and probably in anger tossed them to the wind,
All right. And, like I think it was like 1974, I believe, when the state lottery kind of came in. Do you have any recollections of that change from, it being underground, but it was underground, but yet everybody knew about it, to just being strictly the state lottery? Do you remember the old people talking about that or anything like that?
Yeah, kinda. You know, they felt like they had a better chance of winning because a lot of the policy was I won't say a scam, but you know, like they had what they call readers, and these were people that they would go to, and they would tell them, like they may dream about a dead relative, and then they would tell them to play the number that had dead relative in these, because they had these dream books, books that actually had numbers next to certain items, and if you dreamed about or talked about or felt about something like that, and the readers were kind of hooked up, from what I heard my mother say, with the policy people, and they would make people think that they could tell them their future. Their future meaning that they could play whatever number they told them and what they thought about, and more or less play it and win. But unfortunately, from what I remember hearing as I got older, is that they were all hooked up together. You know, the readers and the, you know, Madam so-and-so in her living room doing whatever, and she got a cut out of whatever she got people to play based on what she told them.
All right. So people felt that they had a better chance.
Yeah, they felt like it would be a little more regulated, and that they, you know, they might stand a better chance, because there was a lot of cheating done with the policy. You know, because there was nobody. Even the police, from what I used to hear my mother say, they, you know, got their cut. More or less. You know, and all of that kind of stuff.
So as it left the black community, was there ever like any sense of remorse that you remember the older people talking about, or a sense of like, this was our operation and now someone else has it? Or? Some
of the older people did. Maybe the younger ones, like my grandmother, they might have felt that way, but you know, they kind of, you know, fuss a little bit. But as I said before, mostly what you heard was the fact that they thought they may stand a better chance, that there'd be less cheating. And you definitely... Now, they still went to the readers and got numbers, but then they played them in the state lottery. Now, they still went to them. It's just that the reader, now, she didn't get any cut from the state, but she would charge the individual that she told this to more money. So, you know, she was still winning either way, you know.
Okay, interesting. All right. Any other stories you recall hearing? I know they're probably less dramatic than the goddamn thrown off the roof.
Oh, that was the worst ever. Not so much so, as I said before. I remember my sister, we were talking about the other day, and she said that whenever our mother would win, she would send her sometimes, which I don't know if that was a good thing or not, but you know, to go pick up her, and it might have been $10, $5 or whatever, but back then, in the early 50s, that was a lot of money, you know, so, you know, she was remembering that much, but, and the drawings all over the street, you know, that was just, you know, all over everywhere. Now, my husband told me a story when I first met him, and he mentioned this again, similar to what I just told you about someone else being killed, as far as, coming into the neighborhood. This was in Chicago Heights to collect money. And this individual, I guess it's always not having the money like they're supposed to, and they were coming into that neighborhood to collect also. And they took this guy into a bathroom right there I guess that's, what is the street that, I can't think of the street he lives on right now, but he showed me the gas station. They took him in there and they shot and killed him. As a result of, and this was also, you know, this mob was pretty prevalent in Chicago Heights as well. And this was back in the early 50s, and it was about the policy money that was not, so that's, I just remember that's two people that we knew of that lost their lives as a result. Now, yes, I kind of remember that there was a lot of, you know, disdain amongst our people, and they did feel like that once the mob, you know, like took it over, that it got a little rougher. I think the price for the, you know, to play kind of went up, and that was, and you're talking about people that, old ladies that kept their money in their bosom or, you know, under their skirts in a little pocket or what have you. They didn't have much to play, but they pulled that quarter out, you know, to play. So once the white man came in and took it over, a lot of things did change, and there was some resentment as far as that was concerned. Now, there was a difference as far as once it became state regulated, because it was cheating from the black as well as the whites. But you didn't see the whites around, from what I can remember, as much as you did the black people in the neighborhood, because a lot of them kind of lived in the neighborhood and not far from it. But the whites had to travel from somewhere to come. So you didn't see them around a lot. But I suspect that they always got them and henchmen in the group to report back what was going on. And I used to hear somebody say, you know, there's old tattletale so-and-so, or, you know, say too much around here because, you know, this, that, or the other. Or, for instance, the well, not madams, but the people that read the palms and things like that, you know, there was bickering sometimes amongst them because they weren't getting their cut. The police sometimes were upset because they'd come into the neighborhoods for their cut. And once the whites took it over, a lot changes like that as far as not being able to get the cut that they expected, or, you know, things of this sort.
Right. Yeah, because I had often heard stuff like that. Like I said, in the early days, it was still in the hands of Ed Jones and Terry Road and all those guys. They were somewhat philanthropists, where they said, you know, they knew they were making money off the community, so they put back into the community.
They did, and especially, now I'm trying to remember his name, and I'll tell you, the movie American Gangster, that movie is based on a true story. And this guy, I'm trying to remember his name.
Frank Lucas or Bumpy
Not
Johnson?
Frank Lucas.
Bumpy
Not
Johnson?
Frank Lucas, Bumpy.
Bumpy Johnson, yeah.
Bumpy Johnson. And then there was also another movie where you had a lady that was also running a gang.
Right,
You know
Stephanie
what I'm talking
Sinclair,
about? Yeah,
Diamond Queen.
yeah, the Diamond Queen, yeah. So they kind of collected money, but they tried to go back into their neighborhoods to do things. Once the white man kind of took it over, a lot of that changed because it was all basically going to them, and they took as little as possible to. In fact, places where people would go and play the lottery, a lot of those were ending up just to be a little cardboard box in the like right outside of a store. And, you know, somebody had to like stand there and do whatever. And then they went to a home later to you know, do the drawings or however. But a lot of the places where, because I used to hear my mother say, it's they done changed the way you go to play the lottery now. And it's and if it's wintertime, you know, you're freezing your butt off trying to stand up there, you know. But they were trying to make their operational cost as small as possible. Now, this is what the white men did. So a lot of the amenities were kind of, you know, fell down as a result.
They were just interested in totally in profit.
Totally in profit. That's all. They couldn't care. They couldn't care less. And even then, a lot of people got cheated because they would play numbers. And from what I understand, I used to hear my mother say that they would, like, people would come to play a number and they would write it, you know, on the thing, and they're supposed to drop it into whatever this drum or whatever it was, and maybe they did, maybe they didn't type thing, and that came back to people to say that, you know, they don't go to that, you know, place to play because they cheat up there, you know, because somebody will get a little high drinking and tell, you know, I half the numbers, I didn't put them in there. And, you know, to get around, so then they knew not to go to certain areas to play their number because there's the possibility you're not going to win because the number's not even been, you know, been placed in there, you know. So.
Something else I like to do when I'm talking about the specific area, maybe a specific subject about a period of time, but I also like to talk about what else was going on during that time. So when you were coming up, like in those 40s and 50s, what else was going on in the black community around then? Like, what type of music, what was the culture like?
Well, the culture was, because it was basically an all black neighborhood. The culture was, children were not like they are today. They had a better mannerism. You know, you knew, even if you went out behind the barn, not the barn, but the garage or whatever, and said bad words or what have you, you wouldn't do it in front of grown people. Right. You respected the grown people, and you didn't let anybody grown see you do wrong things. And because you knew that not only would they get on your case, but then they would go back and tell your parents, everybody in the neighborhood, you know, like maybe you got 2 blocks up and 2 blocks back. You know, everybody knew everybody, and they looked out for everybody. And there was a close-knit. When you hear the saying, "A jungle, it takes a village," it was strictly a village, and everybody looked out for you. You didn't, if you were like I said, gonna do something wrong, you didn't let grown people see you do it, but you knew that they get on your case, and then they go and tell your parents and everything. And it was a more caring situation. You know, nowadays, if you scold somebody's child, they may be subject to pull out a gun and shoot you. Whereas before, people wanted their kids scolded, and I think that it produced a better class of children.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they were more memorable, and they, you know, I think so. So that much, you know, that I see the difference in. You know, the music was R&B, you know, jazz, you know, and you know, some white music, but mostly, like I said, the R&B, you know, all of the old cuts.
Is it doo-wop company that you're
Doo-wop for that, yeah,
okay.
doo-wop.
All right. What were some of the places that you hung out that you can remember? Like some of the restaurants or concert halls? What were some of the places around?
You don't want me to name the places I used to hang
Yeah,
out.
go ahead.
Because the list would go long. Oh, well, you know, there was a Guys and Gals.
Okay.
There was a Hot Chaparral. Now, this is during my as I got to be a young adult.
All right.
I guess you say, or, you know, because there's a place on, I think it's still there on 63rd and Cottage Grove. It's, you have to go down the stairs in the basement. I can't think of it now. I'll think of it in a minute.
Okay.
But I remember that was the first place I went to that I tried to use phony ID. And what they would, because I wasn't old enough, I must have been about 17. And what they would do is they would make you pay first. And then you had to go on down the line and show your ID. And if it wasn't kosher, if they didn't accept it, then they turned you around, but you lost your money.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, and I'm trying to think of the name of that place now, because I understand. Grand Ballroom. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, it's still there.
Yeah, that's why I said it's still there.
So did you get in with the ID?
No, not that time. They kept my money too.
Oh,
yeah. But I could just go on and go on for there's a place on the Skyway Lounge on 76.
Okay.
Yeah. So those were some of the places, and that was what was known back then as the stepper. Well, the stepping came out like in the late, because before that it was like bopping most of your dance. Because I used to go to and walking. Oh yeah, I could walk. I love that too. But let's see. I was gonna tell you something. Let me see. I guess about the 70s is when the stepping became an art, and it was similar to bopping. It was just more of a structure. They had more of a structure to it, you know, and more or less. But I'm going to do that pretty well, and I enjoy dancing, so that was a lot of fun for me. Yeah.
Okay. So now you were saying you came up, what, like you said, on 29th and Federal? Is that where you?
No. I was down there until I was about 8 or 9 years old, and then the state or whoever came in and bought up all those homes and tore them down, and that's when they built those projects that were there like then. So we moved to 43rd Street, 4427 South Berkeley Avenue, Berkeley, which is near the lake where Lake Park is. So that's where I basically grew up from like maybe 8 or 9 years old until I was like about 18.
Is that near what's considered Bronzeville?
Yeah.
So did you ever spend time in Bronzeville? Did you ever go through like 47th Street?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where I went to school. I went to Shakespeare School, which is on, and then from there I went to Forestville North, which is on 47th Street, and so yeah, right around in there, Drexel, 43rd and Drexel, and I'll never forget. There's a funeral home right there on right off of 43rd and Drexel, where they brought him in till. And his mother had him laid out there, and they had people from miles around to come and look at him, and that was the worst thing I could ever. I didn't go to see him. I mean, I saw the crowd and everything, but I didn't get in the line and go in there and see him because people were coming out crying because she did not allow them to change anything. She had them leave him as they had found it, and just put a suit on him and everything. And then it was just really horrible. That was right there at 43rd, a place where, I basically, hung out, like I said, right off of 43rd, 44th and Drexel.
And what are some of more popular places you remember frequented in the Bronzeville?
Well, you know what? In the Brownsville, I wasn't old enough. I had started going to. I didn't go till we moved away from there, and that's when we moved further out south to 71st. Okay. And then that's when I started. But I went back that way, But I'm not sure because see, when you say Brownsville, when I was, going out hanging out or whatever, they didn't name them. Like when they say now on TV, well, this happened in the Brownsville or this happened in this. I'm not sure. I only know them as the numbered street. I'm not always certain of what's Brownsville. I think I just know that over at 43rd, 44th, and all around there is what they consider kind of the Brownsville area. And I just learned that from somebody. But
so
it wasn't called.
Later?
Yeah, right. That wasn't. It wasn't called that. It wasn't called. Okay. It had those type of names back then. No, they didn't. And I'm talking about the late 60s and early 70s.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I guess another thing I want to ask you about, since you mentioned late 60s and 70s, do you recall the gang explosion? Were you near that, like when the Blackstone Rangers and the East Side Disciples started coming around?
Yes.
What are your recollections about that?
Well, they weren't as bad then. I think by the 70s.
Okay. Late
70s is when they started to really, push the younger boys to try to get into the gangs. But during my teenage years, they were able to say no and walk away. Because I didn't even have. I was fortunate enough where the youngsters that I grew up with were not in the drugs. I mean, they smoked reefer stuff like that, but as far as really hard drugs, they didn't. They just and a lot of them went on to school and graduated and stuff. It was like later when the children started to kind of really the gangs got really bad, and now we know they're just I don't know if it's a gang so much as right now even, but there was an era where it was pretty bad. And by this time I had children and I had sons that was backing away from it, and she had a son that backed away from it.
I guess the only other thing, as the era, like the Vietnam War, kind of ushered in through that era, what impact did that have on like you and your immediate circle?
I had friends that I have. I could. Oh wow! I've got two stories I can tell you. There was one young man that I met him as an adult, and he was white, and we talked for a little while, and he had he fixed locks, and he came to fix the lock on my door. So he used to come by sometimes and drink, and he told me that he has a hard time sleeping at night. And so then I said, "You do?" So he said, "Yeah." He said that he was at this camp in Cambodia, I believe it was, and he said they had gone into the camp, and I can forget what they call them now, but the ones that went in before that, which were over in Vietnam, they were the guerrillas or whatever you would say. They went in and kind of killed up everybody there. So then the American groups of soldiers come in to check out to see if there's anybody there can help. And he said that he was walking by himself with his gun, and there was 3 other guys like over about 50-yard distance from him, and there was a little girl about 2 years old that came out of one of the huts, and she was walking toward him. And he saw her, so he's getting ready to put the gun down and go to pick her up. And he said the other guys started shouting at him to shoot her, shoot her, shoot her. And he's looking at them, "What are you talking about? What are you talking about?" And so then they said, "Man, shoot her, shoot her." And then he said, notice that she was kind of, just walking along kind of like that. And then when I saw what it was, he said he shut his eyes and he took his gun and he shot her. And he said she just blew all up. And he said still, and this was like 10 years later, seasoned in his mind, but they would go in and pack the babies down with bombs. And then they would hope that the American soldiers would come in and they would want to try to, because that's what they're there for, to try to protect these people that are being ridiculed by their own government or whatever. I don't understand a whole lot about it, only what I've been told. But this is how they would get rid of a lot of the squads, by packing. And then another guy, and then a lot of the boys that came, the men rather that came back, were really, really messed up. My sister's children older now, but Earl was his name. I don't know if you remember Earl. He had serious issues, and a lot of the young men that I grew up with that came back from Vietnam just had all kinds of problems. They were drugged. They had the war. What is it? I can't think of it right now. I guess I'm a little post-traumatic syndrome, and they couldn't sleep, and they just had, and then that Agent Orange type thing that whatever that chemical was that they put down that was supposed to have been okay, but turned out to really mess up a lot of the guys, and everything. So yeah, the Vietnam War caused a lot of anguish to a lot of young men, especially during that era. A lot of women did not really go into the service the way they are now. So you saw mostly just the men. But I knew quite a few of the guys that I went to school with, grew up with, that went there and came back. And mostly all of them had some sort of issue one way or the other. And it was hard for them to lead their lives, a productive life.
So last era I want to talk about before we get back to policy. Now, do you remember like civil rights and the Black Power movement? Like, what are some of your how was that? Like, what was your experience with that? Those eras?
Well, I don't think so much was done here in Chicago or wherever as seeing it on TV and seeing Martin Luther King and because I remember when they shot him. I remember when that happened, and listening to his talk. Now, I lived on 71st in Halsted at the time, and the one thing I can remember doing that is that 63rd Street was literally destroyed as a result of the riots. And this is where you now have the store owners that put those shields up and pull them down. They didn't have that before. That's where that came from. Because, they just destroyed, because 63rd Street was a shopping area. It was a beautiful place then back in 63rd and Halsted. And all of that was destroyed as a result of the Rodney King situation. Every time anything happened that was black related, there was, terrorist type situations. And it was all destroying, which I never could understand, their own neighborhood. Because this is a grocery store you got to come to in the morning to get some milk. And you don't burn it down. That was, I never understood that. And as I said, Martin Luther King was, doing a lot of preaching then, and trying to get people to get rights, equal rights for them. Because he felt like we were men just like they were,
Right. All right. So as we wind down for time, I just want to steer it back to policy. I say, wow, you lived through a lot of different eras. It's just fascinating listening to you talk. I can do this all day, but it's really fascinating. I'm learning a lot. So far we covered that policy was a homegrown operation. You could pay for as little as a quarter, and it was African American owned. And when it was African American owned, it was more not so much. It was still a business, but it was still more philanthropic. The people. The owners then were African American, so they knew they were making money from the community. They put money back in the community. But when the white mob muscled in, it became more ruthless. Like I said, the guy thrown off the window, shot in the gas station. They took away, like you can go play in basements and houses, but to cut costs, they had people standing outside playing. So they was just all take and no give when they muscled in. Kind of like today.
Yes, and some things never change.
Exactly, right. And then after that, the bigger crooks, the state came and took it over and made it the state lottery. So therefore, kind of like a pipeline to the black community was kind of just taken out right from under them. So in closing, do you have any other recollections or anything else that you recall about policy? Because I know you said you were a child, so most of it was secondhand. You heard a lot, but anything other recollections, memories about policy?
Well, memories mostly about relatives, and as I said before, the children, my sisters and I would sit back and listen, and you had relatives or friends that would come over they always sat around the table and had coffee or tea or what have you, and they would, girl, I dreamed that so and so's pregnant, and I'm going around here to play my numbers, and you know, and I'm going to do this and that. So that it was always a conversation. That was like the beginning of the group getting together for the morning coffee. Is to discuss what numbers they were going to play and how they arrived at discussing. You know, how they arrived at choosing these numbers.
So is that integral to the community that it was just table talk almost, like the start of the morning?
The start of the morning.
Wow,
and these are mostly the women. You didn't hear the men. I don't have a whole lot of recollection about the men mostly. It was mostly women.
Really?
That, from what I could gather, that played the number. Mostly the women that would go see Sister Mary, who would read their palm and tell them some great fortune, and you know, and I'm gonna play number blah 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 blah. And as I said before, most of these people play the lottery every single day, but it was very, very rare from my circle. You know, the blocks that I lived in, where you heard of anybody. Actually, the most I heard was $25. Anybody, and that was a lot of money if you played a quarter or however, you know, $1 maybe, or however. I don't know what it took to get the quarter. I mean the $25, but nobody ever seemed to win much. But they played faithfully. They still played faithfully. You know, getting it off their bosom or whatever. It was important. It was an important thing for that's mostly, like I said, black women when I grew up.
Okay. Well, I thank you for your time. I really enjoyed it. I could sit here till tomorrow and we still be talking. This is
because you know I remember things. Exactly. Things come back to me. You know, you know, whatever. But
we have to do it again sometime. Get some more memories.
Sure.
Right. Well, thank you all for listening. This has been a very informative talk. So we learned history of policy, you know, from someone who sort of, you know, lived through the era. I thank everybody for tuning in. And join me again as I continue my journey researching the policy numbers game.